The wind screamed against the wooden walls of the cabin, a restless voice clawing to get in. Ethan Cole stood by the workbench in the corner, carefully tightening the last screw on a crooked shelf, his breath fogging in the cool air. The fire in the stove crackled, its warmth chasing away the shadows that clung stubbornly to the far corners of the room. Outside, the storm showed no mercy, snow whipping sideways, burying the narrow mountain road under a white, shifting blanket. It was the kind of night when no one in their right mind would be out, which is why, when the knock came, Ethan froze. It wasn't a casual knock. It was quick, sharp, and full of urgency, like someone desperate to be heard. He lifted his head slowly, his ears straining. The hammer in his hand felt heavier than before. Ben, his 15-year-old son, looked up from the chessboard on the rug. "Dad?" he asked quietly, glancing toward the door as if half expecting it to burst open. Mia, only 7, peeked out from behind the blanket draped over her small frame on the couch. Her wide eyes reflected the flickering firelight. "Who could it be?" she whispered. The knock came again, louder, faster. Ethan's mind raced. No neighbors for miles, no visitors without warning, and certainly not in weather like this. He slipped on his thick winter coat, its fabric worn and patched in places from years of use. Every instinct told him to be cautious, but another voice, a softer, more human voice, reminded him that someone might be in real trouble out there. He opened the door, and the storm immediately roared inside, stinging his face with icy pellets. A figure stumbled forward out of the swirling snow, one hand gripping the doorframe to keep from falling. She was breathless, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her dark hair wild and dusted with snow. Her coat, though clearly expensive, was ripped along the sleeve, and there was a tremor in her voice when she spoke. I'm sorry to intrude. My car slid off the road. I didn't know where else to go. I saw your light." Her words came in quick bursts, like she had been holding them in against the cold. Ethan stepped back without hesitation. "Get in, quickly." She moved inside, clutching the blanket he handed her as if it were the only thing holding the warmth. In her body, the firelight revealed a face that was calm yet guarded, the kind of face that had learned to hide its truths. Ben stared at her from the floor, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Mia offered a shy smile from the couch. "Thank you," the woman said, sitting near the stove, her hands wrapped tightly around the steaming mug of tea Ethan placed before her. "My name's Isabel." She stopped there, offering nothing more. Ethan didn't push for details. Out here, in the quiet isolation of the mountains, people respected privacy, sometimes because it was polite, and sometimes because it was safer not to know too much. Still, as the hours passed, something about her gnawed at him. She spoke little, yet when she did, her voice carried a kind of quiet authority. When Mia asked about the strange bracelet on her wrist, Isabel smiled, faintly, but shifted the conversation away. The storm showed no sign of stopping. By midnight, it was clear she would need to stay. Ethan gave her the spare room, moving Mia into his own bed and Ben onto the couch. Long after everyone had gone to sleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the snow-covered world outside. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew there was more to Isabel than what she was letting on. Her eyes had that look someone used to being in control, but suddenly out of place. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that the stranger now sleeping under his roof wasn't just lost in a snowstorm. She was hiding from a life most people would never believe, and that life was about to collide with his in ways that would change everything. The morning broke quietly, with the storm having finally spent its rage during the night. Outside, the world was buried under a thick, untouched layer of snow that glittered like scattered diamonds in the pale sunlight. The cabin was wrapped in a fragile stillness, the kind that comes after nature has shown its power. Ethan awoke early, as he always did, moving quietly so as not to wake Mia, who was still curled under his blanket. He stepped into the hallway, the wooden boards creaking under his weight, and caught the scent of something unexpected. Coffee. In the kitchen, Isabel stood with her back to him, steam curling up from the pot on the stove. Her long dark hair was pulled loosely over one shoulder, the ends brushing against the faded flannel shirt she had borrowed. She moved with quiet confidence, as though she had been here 100 times before. though she'd only arrived last night. "Morning," Ethan said, his voice still rough from sleep. She turned, a faint smile touching her lips. "Morning. I found the coffee tin in the cupboard. I hope you don't mind." He shook his head. "Not at all. You'll make me look bad if you keep this up." Though they shared a small laugh, but Ethan noticed something in her eyes' alertness, as if she were measuring every word and gesture. She slid a mug toward him, and as he took it, her hand brushed his just for a second. It was warm, but steady. Ben shuffled into the kitchen next, his hair a mess, his eyes still heavy with sleep. Mia followed a moment later, rubbing her eyes and clinging to her blanket. Isabel's face softened when she saw them, and in a way that surprised Ethan. She seemed to know exactly how to speak to each of them. By the time breakfast was finished, she was sitting at the table with Mia, helping her glue pieces onto a school project about animals in winter. She spoke with genuine interest, explaining how some creatures adapt to survive in the snow. Her words were rich with knowledge, but never condescending. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. Watching them, Isabel didn't seem like someone running from trouble, or if she was, she wore her composure like armor. And yet, in her laughter, there was a trace of something fragile, like a song played softly so it wouldn't be heard by the wrong ears. The day passed quietly, but small details began to stand out. When the old laptop on the shelf wouldn't start, Isabel took it apart with a precision that suggested more than casual know-how. When Ben asked her about a strange map in his geography book, she gave an answer that hinted at first-hand experience, rather than something read in a book. Later that evening, as the snow outside took on the blue tint of twilight, Ethan found her standing by the window, staring out into the silent forest. Her expression was unreadable. "Everything all right?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "It's peaceful here." Her voice was calm, but there was something in it, a weight, a longing that told him peace was not her usual state. Before he could reply, Mia came bounding into the room, pulling Isabel toward the kitchen to taste the cookies she and Ben had made. Isabel smiled and followed, but Ethan stayed behind, unsettled by the way she had looked at the snow, as though it both comforted and trapped her. That night, after the kids were asleep, they found themselves alone by the fire. The flames danced between them, painting their faces in shifting light. Ethan poured 2 mugs of tea and handed one to her. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said, "but I get the feeling you're not just some traveler caught in the storm." Her gaze held his for a long moment. "You'd be right," she admitted quietly, "but it's safer for you not to know too much." He didn't push. Something in her tone made it clear she wasn't being dramatic. This was a truth wrapped in warning. Just before midnight, Ethan stirred from half-sleep at the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway. He rose and saw a faint light spilling from the kitchen. Isabel stood at the table, her coat on, a phone in her hand. The screen's glow lit her face, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I thought you didn't have service out here," Ethan said quietly from the doorway. She turned sharply, surprised, then relaxed slightly. "I don't. But sometimes there's a signal if you know where to stand." The way she said it was almost too casual, as if she were covering something. The conversation ended there, but Ethan lay awake for a long time after she returned to her room. Something was shifting, subtle but certain. She hadn't come here by chance, and if the storm hadn't forced her to stop, she might have kept going without a trace. What he didn't know was that her world, the one she had tried to leave behind, was already moving closer, and soon, the quiet cabin in the mountains would no longer be just a place of refuge. It would become the center of a storm far greater than the one that had brought her here. Ethan woke the next morning to a silence so deep it almost felt unnatural. No wind, no creak of the pines outside, just the muffled quiet that comes after a heavy snowfall. The cabin was still, the kind of stillness that made every sound seem louder. He slipped from bed, careful not to wake Mia, and padded into the hallway. From the kitchen came the faint clink of dishes. Isabel was already up, wearing the same flannel shirt from the day before, her hair loosely tied back. She was rinsing cups at the sink, her posture relaxed but her eyes distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere far away. "Morning," Ethan said, leaning on the doorway. She turned, offered a small smile. "Morning. I made coffee again." and I might have fixed that cabinet door that kept sticking." He raised an eyebrow. "You're starting to make yourself useful around here." Her smile grew just a fraction, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's nice to feel useful." Over breakfast, Ben asked if they could go outside and shovel the path to the woodshed. The storm had buried it so deep they'd need a clear path to get firewood for the next few days. Isabel surprised Ethan by offering to help. She pulled on Ethan's spare winter jacket and boots, both several sizes too big, and stepped into the glittering white morning with them, out in the snow. She worked with quiet determination, matching Ethan's pace, her breath clouding in the frosty air. More than once, he caught her glancing toward the road as if expecting to see something or someone coming through the drifts. When the work was done, they stood side by side, looking at the cleared path. "You're not built for this kind of weather," Ethan said lightly. Isabel smirked faintly. "You'd be surprised what I'm built for." It was meant as a joke, but there was something in the way she said it that stuck with him, like a hint at a story left untold. The day passed in small, ordinary ways. Ben chopping kindling, Mia building a snow fort near the porch, Ethan repairing a loose hinge on the pantry door. Isabel drifted between them all, lending a hand where she could, always with that quiet attentiveness. That evening, as the kids worked on a puzzle in the living room, Ethan found Isabel sitting at the small desk by the window, writing in a slim leather-bound notebook. She quickly closed it when she noticed him. "Old habit," she said lightly. "I write when I can't say things out loud." He wanted to ask more, but Mia's laughter broke the moment, and Isabel seemed grateful for the interruption. Later that night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan stirred at the faint sound of movement. He stepped into the hallway and saw a thin slice of light under the front door. Quietly, he opened it just enough to peer outside. Isabel stood at the edge of the porch, her figure outlined against the moonlit snow. She wasn't just looking at the forest, she was listening. Every muscle in her body was tense, as if waiting for a signal only she could hear. When she turned and saw him, she didn't seem startled. "Couldn't sleep," she said softly. "You're looking for something," Ethan replied, his voice low but steady. Her gaze held his for a long moment. "Maybe, or maybe I'm making sure something isn't looking for me." The words settled between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. The next morning brought a subtle shift in the air. Isabel moved through the day with more purpose, as if she'd made some decision during the night. She offered to take over making lunch, and when she did, Ethan noticed the way her hands worked, precise, efficient, as though she'd been trained for something far beyond cooking. It was only when Ben dropped a comment about city life that she froze, her eyes flicking to Ethan before quickly recovering. "I've lived in cities," she said carefully, "but they're not what people imagine, not for everyone." That evening, as the fire crackled, she finally asked Ethan about his life, how he came to live in the mountains, what he'd done before. He told her about losing his wife, about choosing this quiet place to raise his children away from the chaos of the world. She listened without interrupting, her expression softening with every word. When he finished, she stared into the fire for a moment before saying, "You chose this life. I didn't get to choose mine, but maybe or maybe now I do." Ethan didn't know what she meant, but he saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, a hope that hadn't been there before. What he didn't see, however, was the black SUV crawling along the snow-packed road miles away, its windows tinted, its occupants speaking into headsets. They weren't lost, they weren't sightseeing, they were searching. And soon, the stillness of the mountains would shatter. The sound came in the middle of the night, not loud, but sharp enough to pull Ethan from sleep. At first, he thought it was just the old roof shifting under the weight of snow, but then it came again, a soft crunching outside, deliberate, measured. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mia, and moved through the hallway toward the front door. The cabin was dark except for the faint glow from the embers in the stove. He paused, listening. The sound was gone, replaced by the deep hush of winter night. Still, something felt different, the kind of quiet that isn't peace, but anticipation. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement in the living room. Isabel was there, standing completely still, her coat already on, one hand resting against the window frame as she looked out into the darkness. "You hear it too?" Ethan asked quietly. She didn't turn. They're closer than I thought. The words sent a chill through him, not because of what she said, but because of how certain she sounded. Before he could ask, Ben's voice drifted groggily from the hallway. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Ethan said quickly. "Go back to bed." But Isabel's eyes stayed fixed on the tree line, her jaw tense. The next morning, the sky was a pale gray, heavy with the promise of more snow. Isabel seemed calmer, but Ethan could tell it was an act. Over breakfast, she barely touched her food, her gaze occasionally flicking toward the window. After the dishes were done, she surprised him by asking, "Can we walk down to the old trail by the river?" "It's not exactly a stroll," Ethan replied, "especially in this weather." "All the more reason," she said simply. "I need to see something for myself." Ben and Mia stayed behind to work on a puzzle, so Ethan led her through the snow-packed path that wound between towering pines. The air was crisp, the silence broken only by the crunch of their boots. When they reached a bend in the trail, Isabel stopped. "There," she said, pointing toward the slope above the river. Ethan followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just a stretch of snow and trees. But then he noticed the faint outline of tire tracks, half buried under fresh snowfall. They were too far from the main road, too deliberate to be accidental. "You think someone's been up here?" he asked. "I know they have," she said, her voice low. "And they'll come again." She didn't explain further, and Ethan didn't press. But the walk back was filled with an unspoken urgency. That evening, she helped Mia with homework, smiling and laughing as though nothing was wrong. Ethan couldn't reconcile the two sides of her, the warm, gentle presence with his kids, and the woman who seemed ready for a threat only she understood. When the children were asleep, she finally spoke. "The people looking for me, they're not here to talk. If they find me, they'll take me back, and I won't get another chance to leave." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. "Leave from what?" She hesitated, then said, "A life I never wanted, a cage made of money and power, one I was born into but never chose." It wasn't the full truth, he could tell, but it was enough to feel the weight of her fear. Before they could continue, a low rumble rolled through the night. Not thunder and engine. Ethan crossed to the window, heart pounding. Headlights flickered briefly in the distance before vanishing behind the trees. "They found me," Isabel whispered. Ethan turned to her, but she was already moving, gathering her bag, checking the contents quickly before slinging it over her shoulder. "You can't just run out into this," he said firmly. Her eyes softened for a brief moment. "You've been kind to me, Ethan, kinder than I deserve. But if I stay, I'll bring trouble to your door." "You already have," he replied, his voice calm but resolute. "And I'm not sending you out there alone." The look she gave him then was unreadable, part gratitude, part something deeper. But before she could respond, there was another sound outside. Not just one engine now, several. The cabin's warmth felt smaller, tighter. The night beyond the windows seemed depressing, and somewhere out in that cold, the people who had been searching for Isabel were finally closing the distance. The engines idled for a few seconds, their low, steady growl carrying through the trees like the rumble of a storm still hidden behind the mountains. Then came the crunch of boots on snow, slow, deliberate, unhurried steps that told Ethan these people weren't in a rush. They knew they would be welcomed by fear. Isabel moved closer to the window, staying in the shadows so the light from inside wouldn't catch her face. Her eyes tracked the faint movement between the trees' dark figures for, maybe 5. Advancing in a loose line. "You need to get the kids out of here," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "The storm's still too thick. We'd never make it far. They won't care about the storm." Her tone was sharp, but beneath it was something else, regret. "You don't understand. They have resources. They can shut down roads, track phones, freeze accounts. When they want someone, they get them." He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice so it wouldn't carry. "Then maybe it's time someone made sure they didn't." A flicker of surprise passed over her features, but she didn't respond. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out something small and metallic, a flash drive on a thin chain. "If anything happens to me, keep this safe. It's the only thing they want more than me." Ethan took it reluctantly, slipping it into his pocket without looking at it. "What's on it?" "Proof," she said simply, "of things they've done, of things they'd destroy me to hide." The knock at the door was almost polite, as if whoever stood there was just paying a casual visit. Ethan didn't move, his mind racing. Beside him, Isabel's hands clenched the back of a chair, her knuckles pale. "Mr. Cole." A man's voice called, smooth and measured. "We'd like to have a word with your guest. This can be quick, if you cooperate." Ben's voice came from the hallway, groggy and confused. "Dad, who is?" Ethan held up a hand to silence him, then called out, "You've got the wrong place." The pause that followed was short but heavy. Then the man said, "We're patient, Mr. Cole, but the weather's turning worse. Let's make this easy." Through the side window, Ethan saw another figure moving toward the back of the cabin. They weren't just going to wait. Isabel's eyes darted toward the kitchen. "The cellar does it lock from the inside?" "It does," he replied. "Then get the kids in there. Now." He didn't argue. Ben and Mia were still half asleep. As he guided them down into the cellar, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure he believed. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." When he came back up, Isabel was gone from the living room. He spotted her near the door, holding one of his heavy winter shovels like a weapon. "You think that'll stop them?" he asked quietly. Her answer was calm. "It might slow them." The back door rattled suddenly, someone testing it. Ethan moved toward the kitchen, grabbing the old hunting rifle from the wall. It hadn't been fired in years, but the weight of it in his hands gave him something to hold onto besides fear. The front door's handle turned. The lock held. "For now, I know you're scared," Isabel said without looking at him, her voice low but steady. "But don't let them see it. They feed on that." Ethan glanced at her, taking in the way she stood, shoulders squared, grip firm, eyes locked on the door. She wasn't just hiding from these people. She'd been running from them for a long time. The knocking came again, harder this time, rattling the frame. Then came the voice, "Last chance, Mr. Cole." Ethan felt something shift inside him. He had lived a quiet life since his wife passed, keeping his world small to protect what mattered most. But now, trouble had arrived at his door, and protecting his family meant standing in its way. He stepped forward, the rifle in his hands steady. "You're not taking her." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Then came the crunch of boots retreating a few steps, only to be replaced by another sound, metal on wood. The unmistakable scrape of a crowbar at the edge of the door. Isabel's gaze met his, a spark of something unspoken passing between them. She knew this was the moment when everything would break open: her past, his quiet life, the storm outside, and the one about to come through that door. And neither of them had any intention of backing down. The first blow splintered the doorframe, a deep crack that echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. Isabel didn't flinch. If anything, her stance grew steadier, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. The next hit came harder, the crowbar biting deep into the wood. Snow swirled in through the widening gap, stinging Ethan's face as the wind howled its encouragement to the invaders. "Ben, Mia, stay down." He shouted toward the cellar, though he knew the children couldn't see. He just wanted them to hear his voice, to know he was still standing. A hand appeared through the opening, groping for the lock. Isabel moved fast, swinging the shovel. In a tight arc, the heavy steel edge smashed against the intruder's wrist. A sharp cry followed, and the hand withdrew. Silence. Ethan's single quotes' breath misted in the cold air now creeping inside. He glanced at Isabel, whose eyes never left the door. "They'll come again," she said quietly. "They don't give up." As if on cue, movement flickered at the side window, a shadow crossing the glass. Ethan turned, raising the rifle. "Get back," he barked. The shadow froze, then ducked out of sight. Boots crunched in the snow round the cabin's side, heading toward the rear. "They're trying to split us up," Isabel muttered. She set down the shovel and reached into her coat, pulling out a small, sleek black phone. Its screen was shattered, but the device was still alive, its faint blue glow lighting her face. "You said it couldn't be tracked," Ethan said. "It can't. Not unless I turn this on." She tapped the screen, fingers moving quickly. "I wasn't going to, But if they're here, they know where I am anyway. Might as well make the call. Ethan didn't ask who she was calling. He could tell by her voice, low and deliberate, that this wasn't some emergency services number. She spoke in short phrases, code-like, before slipping the phone back into her pocket. "You trust them?" he asked. Her answer was simple. "Enough." The front door rattled again, this time from a solid kick. The hinges groaned but held. Ethan raised the rifle, his finger brushing the trigger, his ears straining for the next sound. And then it came not from the front, but from the back. The rear door burst open with a crash, the storm rushing in along with two figures in dark coats. Ethan swung around, aiming instinctively, but Isabel moved first. She grabbed the edge of the heavy oak dining table and shoved it forward with a strength that startled him. The table slammed into one of the intruders, pinning him against the wall. The second man lunged at her, but Ethan stepped between them. The rifle's barrel pressed hard against the man's chest. "Back off," he growled. For a moment, nobody moved. The wind shrieked through the open back door, snow scattering across the floor. Then came the faint sound of engines, again more than one, getting closer. The pinned intruder's eyes flickered with recognition. "You called them," he spat at Isabel. Her expression was unreadable. "Told you," she said softly. "I'm done running." Headlights cut through the swirling snow outside, bright beams sweeping over the trees. Within moments, more figures emerged from the storm, but these moved with purpose. Their jackets marked with a crest Ethan didn't recognize. The two intruders exchanged a glance. Then the one at the door muttered into a small earpiece. A moment later, they retreated, slipping back into the darkness without another word. Ethan kept the rifle raised until they were gone, until the headlights faded and the only sounds were the wind and his own pounding heartbeat. Isabel finally lowered the table, letting it rest back on its legs. She looked at him then, and for the first time, the guarded mask she wore seemed to crack just slightly. "You didn't have to stand with me," she said. "I did," he replied simply, "because you stood with us." For a long moment, they just stood there, the storm easing outside as if it too was exhausted. Somewhere below, Ben and Mia whispered to each other in the cellar, the fragile sound of hope creeping back into their voices. Isabel stepped toward the back door, staring out into the snowy night. "It's not over," she said, "but you've given me something I haven't had in a long time." "What's that?" Ethan asked. She turned to face him, a faint smile touching her lips. "A reason to believe I can win." And in that moment, with the snow settling gently on the world beyond, Ethan realized this wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs, and they were ready.